with the French military no longer seen as a source of security, but as a relic from the past that Chad and others no longer need.
This Friday morning, thousands of Chadians took to the streets in N'Djamena to protest against the French military presence in their country.
You know, they're calling this a humiliation and a big surprise for France.
Government has already announced that it's ending the military agreement between Chad and France, although no official date was set for the French military to leave.
Only if the African people can come together, starting now in West Africa, and tell, in this case, the colonial power France, to get the hell out, to keep your paltry development aid, to forget about the idea that you can power yourself at our expense while we live in darkness and penury. You live as a superpower, as a nuclear-armed superpower with veto, vote and power in the United Nations. While we remain poor, you are rich. Forget about that. If the African people of West Africa can come together and at least say that, you will have struck a blow for all of the people of all of the tribes of West Africa. Think about that. Because the real division in the world, I promise you, it's not between the Igbos and others in Nigeria. The real division in the world is between the haves and the have-nots.
Protesters want them out as soon as possible for the sake of the country's sovereignty. Harold Gerard has the details.
There were at least 4 different locations where protesters gathered at the same time, all in the capital city in N'Djamena. All the people we spoke to at the demonstration were very thankful to the Chadian President Mohamed Idris Deby for breaking the agreement, the military agreement with France, but are now asking for a concrete timeline for troop withdrawal. A large part of the Chadian public believe cooperation with French soldiers didn't help to turn Chad in a more secure place. The country is still facing several security challenges, especially in the Lake Chad region, where the insurgent group Boko Haram continues to target civilians.
These EFK original documentaries, kindly subscribe to the channel. It helps me help you. Yeah, helps me help you. Now, imagine somebody has been bullying you for a very long time. You know, you are the one who was always humble. They always told you, go and bring me some bread and milk, and they would give you 5 shillings. 5 shillings is equal to 0.00005 US dollars. They want bread and they want milk. You bring them that bread and milk, and then you also add some change on top of it. And if you don't do this, you'd face severe punishment. And then one day you grow up and you grow some muscles, and you are now able to defend yourself. And now this person comes back and continues doing that. Now tell me, what comes into your mind first when you are now grown muscle, you think you can take him head on, and the bully is coming? What comes into your mind first? I know what comes into your mind. What comes into your mind is you can be able to defend or attack him, you know. It's not really attacking him, but it's now a defensive, not an offensive, right? This is what is happening with Africa right now. Africa is taking a defensive, and the Europeans are thinking it is taking an offensive. Some Europeans, not all of them. Why am I saying all this? I'm saying all this because France, our best friend France, is now being kicked all around, you know. France used to kick everyone around. France used to bully everyone. They wanted bread and milk without giving money for it. But when they wanted it, they wanted it. They didn't care where you'll get the money. And now the Africans have grown muscle. The Africans have decided to retaliate, or rather to be defensive. How far is France from Africa? It's very far. The closest country to Africa, which is European, is Spain. And that is somewhere in Morocco. The farthest distance between Morocco and France is 14. Morocco and Spain is 14 kilometers. But how far is France from Spain? Some very good kilometers. Now, why are they coming to Africa to offend us? If they come to offend us, we have to defend ourselves. And I'm happy, I'm very joyful that now the Africans can't be bullied around. The Africans have decided we are going to put an end to this. The Africans have decided to be defensive, not offensive. Because if we were offensive, it would be a different story. France and its other companies are being kicked outside Africa. It started with Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso. It went to Senegal. It went to Chad. It's now spreading, you know. I want us to watch a video here and get to understand the real deal, the real story about what's really happening. And then by the end of the video, of course, I shall share with you my thoughts where we shall also have a deep critical analysis. And I've prepared very good history for you. So watch this video till the end. Let's dive in.
They are calling it a humiliation and a surprise because France keep on taking hits after hits with what's going on in West Africa. See, earlier this year, France sent Jean-Marie Bouquet, aka the African Whisperer, over to Côte d'Ivoire, Gabon, and Chad to take their temperature and see if they can get away with keeping French support in that region. But when it comes to Senegal, he flew over it, didn't want to stop by, claiming that elections were happening. But was that the truth? Senegal's been on a sovereignty mission, and Prime Minister Sonko's been loud about wanting the French out. And in June of 2024, when President Faye visited France, he acted diplomatic when questioned about France's presence in the region. He kind of gave the impression like, we're still thinking about it. And you can see from Macron's face, that's not a smile. He's probably pissed. Because little did he know, turns out they were already done thinking about it, and just recently they released a statement that they want all French bases to close down and to exit stage left. Now as for Chad, when our guy Bouquet, you know, the African Whisperer, visited Chad earlier this year, he went back to France and told his friends, we have everything under control, okay? We get to keep our bases, but we gotta tone down our presence in the region. Now fast forward to November 28th, a significant date for Chad, marking the proclamation of the Republic. The French foreign minister, let me show you him. This guy right over here, Jean-Noël Barrot, okay, flew in for his usual visits. This is what they kind of do. I don't even know why he rolled up on a day like this, but just hours after he left, Chad announced that they're ending the support pact with France, asking all the servicemen and servicewomen to go back to France. They could even wait for Jean-Noël to land back in Paris before they dropped the eviction letter. Like, they were so blindsided that even the government of Chad has to make an announcement. No incident happened, okay? Nothing went off. We just are kind of done. Now, who do you think will be the next country?
Just as French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot left the country, Chad declared an end to its security ties with Paris, shutting the door on its former military ally. The announcement came on the day Chad was celebrating its independence from France.
France is an essential partner, but it must now also consider that Chad has grown up. Chad has matured. Chad is a sovereign state.
French soldiers have been on the ground since colonial times, launching nuclear tests in Chad's desert in the 1960s. Despite civil wars and coups, France has long maintained its military presence here. The French government says it's there to support the Chadian government's effort to fight off armed groups in the Sahel. But many in the Sahel say the French military has failed to stop the violence, which has greatly affected civilians. After being forced out of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, now 1,000 French soldiers are being asked to withdraw from Chad.
We are changing our military posture with the intention of reconfiguring our partnerships in coordination with our African partners so that they can be more flexible and better able to respond.
President Mahamat Déby, who took over after his father was killed in 2021, is now turning to Russia, seeking new security ties. Across much of the Sahel region of West Africa, the winds appear to be shifting from west to east.
Angela, Macron earlier was warning against what he called this risk of a weakening West. Tell us a bit more about that.
He was also referring to the BRICS Plus summit recently, this idea that Western dominance is really being challenged now. And he said, you know, this is what's happening. We need to take notice of it. There is, if you just look at the Ukraine war, often a perspective from what we sometimes call the global south or any other countries outside the US and Europe, that when a country is invaded, Elsewhere in the world, it is seen as a territorial dispute. When it is a country which involves Europe or the US, it is seen as a matter of universal values and something quite different. That really irritates countries outside the West, and there's this growing challenge to the West. I think he wanted to talk a little about Africa as well, which he alluded to so much in that speech. Of course, we've all seen what's been happening in Niger in recent weeks. And this is an anti-Western narrative, but also an anti-French narrative, which is increasingly taking hold in Africa. We saw it in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Niger. Emmanuel Macron was very forceful in his defence of French interventions in those countries. He made absolutely clear to the ambassadors it needs to be got across to the world that those governments invited France in to help them try to combat jihadist forces. And he was very concerned about this narrative taking hold. These wars are often not popular within France. A lot of French soldiers die in them. And he was very keen to get across that this isn't France rampaging around Africa. Governments asked France in. They did make efforts to combat jihadists, limited success. He now says, we must be careful not to overstay our welcome. It is clear that these interventions need to be reframed. He talked about a new partnership with Kenya, which, of course, is not a former French colony. So that is something quite different. And he also mixed it with problems surrounding immigration here in France and this idea that France, as a former colonial power in Africa, is being portrayed around the world as not dealing well with its former colonies, being too close to governments. He said that France had perhaps made a mistake in being sometimes very good with its relationship with certain governments and nurturing that, but ignoring civil society and failing to take into account just how popular or unpopular those governments were. There are also implications, he said, for people who have backgrounds from those countries who now live in France. And he said, again, it needs to be got across to the outside world. Yes, France has made mistakes, as all former colonial powers have, but some of the positive elements of France's relationship with its former colonies, both outside in Africa.
What will President Macron do now? These are the likely next steps after the collapse of the French government. On Wednesday evening, French Prime Minister Michel Barnier lost a historic vote of no confidence and will be forced to resign. He will be the shortest-serving Prime Minister in French history, and the vote has thrown France into political chaos. Macron appointed Barnier as the head of a fragile minority government in September. 3 months later, Barnier has been ejected before even being able to adopt a budget for next year. Macron is now again looking for a Prime Minister, his fourth this year. With the economy in 3.2 trillion euros of debt and discontent threatening to erupt on the streets, public sector unions are preparing to strike on Thursday. Commentators are starting to suggest that the only solution could be Macron's resignation, which would open the way to a new presidential election that would reshape the political landscape. Speaking in Saudi Arabia, where he was on a state visit, Macron said he would remain in office until the end of his second and final term in 2027. But his opponents, notably Marine Le Pen, the figurehead of the populist right National Rally, are not so sure. She is said to believe that if Macron's next Prime Minister is also ousted, the president will face growing pressure to...
Well, for some analysis now, I'm joined on set by our French politics editor, Mark Perelman. Mark, first of all, how much of a surprise or not is this announcement?
In Senegal, it's not so much of a surprise. Clearly, there were question marks. A few months ago, the Prime Minister, Ousmane Sonko, had said that, France shouldn't have military bases in Senegal forever. That clearly this is an issue of sovereignty. The president, whom we saw in that report, then came here to Paris. He met with the French president. The French president asked him directly, do you still want our military presence? And the Senegalese president said, well, we'll have to think about it. Clearly, they thought about it, and they've decided that this is the end of the military presence in Dakar, the capital of Senegal. It doesn't come so much of a surprise also because Macron has designated an envoy, Jean-Marie Bockel, to figure out the new military presence in 4 African countries. including Senegal. And he traveled to 3 of those countries, except one, Senegal. He said that it was because there were elections there, but clearly it's also because he was probably not welcome. And today we have the answers. The French soldiers will have to leave. We don't know exactly when, but now this has been set in motion. The base in Dakar will shut down in the foreseeable future.
Now, Chad has also put an end to the defence partnership with France. This is considered quite a historic turning point for the country, isn't it?
Absolutely. This is indeed a surprise. This is not what the French authorities were working on. Jean-Marie Bockel, whom I just mentioned, was in Chad. He had said a few months ago, of course, France will stay in terms of military presence. We need to stay. And there had been discussions about reducing the number of French troops, also about possibly keeping France has not only one base, but it has 3 military bases in the country. And the idea was to have fewer soldiers, but to remain present in those 3 different areas. And the French were quite optimistic that there would be a solution. And so the fact that the Chadian authorities have decided that this is the end and that the soldiers will have to leave, we don't know exactly when, came really as a surprise. And maybe I should add a humiliation also, because the French foreign minister was in Chad and he met with his counterparts. They made a statement together, and a few hours after he left, Chad issued a statement saying this is the end of the defense agreement. Their foreign minister then said, this is not like in the Sahel, we're not kicking the French out, we'll make sure we discuss how we proceed. But this is really a historical break, because Chad is the country in Africa where France has intervened militarily the most. I mean, they've been there for decades, and they were counting on this, because whereas in Gabon, in Senegal, in Ivory Coast, the presence is more symbolic than anything else. In Chad, it's strategic because it's a region close to Sudan, close to the Republic of Central Africa, and Chad has also been active in fighting jihadist groups. So the French were really counting on this from a strategic standpoint. So it's really bad news for Paris, and certainly not something.
So, here's a brief history of how France spread its colonies around the world. We are also going to focus on Africa, which is our main focal point, but I also want us to focus on America and some parts of Asia. So, from the 16th to the 17th century, the first French colonial empire existed. It mainly existed in the Americas and Asia. Now, during the 19th and the 20th century, the second French colonial empire existed mainly in Africa and Asia. That is now between 19th and 20th, America and Asia, 16, 17, Asia and America, you know. France had 80 colonies throughout its history, the second most colonies in the world behind only the British Empire. Around 40 countries gained independence from France without its history. You know, the second most in the world behind only the British Empire. Around 40 countries gained independence from France without its history. The second most in the world behind only the British Empire. Over 50% of the world's borders today were drawn as a result of British and French imperialism. So it is safe to say that the French and the British colonialism is what really transpired Otto von Bismarck to create his Berlin Conference. Because if you come to think of it, these two guys were the ones who are having most colonies. The French took some parts of Northern Africa, most of it, and some good parts of West Africa. The Central East and the Southern Africa were left for mainly the British, because we also had the Germans and we had the Belgians. Belgian Congo took only CAR, Central African Republic, and I think they also, I'm certainly sure they took Congo. How can I think about what Leopold did? No African can forget that, you know. Now, France began to establish colonies in North America, the Caribbean and India, following Spanish and Portuguese success during the Age of Discovery. In rivalry with Britain, a series of war with Britain during the 18th century and early 19th century, which France finally lost, almost ended in its colonial ambition in these regions. And without it, what some historians term the first French colonial empire. In the 19th century, starting with the conquest of Algiers in 1830, France began the establishment of new empire in Africa and Southeast Asia. The following is a list of countries that were part of the French colonial empires from 1534, 490 years ago to the present, either entirely or in part, either under French sovereignty or as a mandate. Now, in the Americas, we had the present-day Canada, which was called New France in 1534 to 1763. Present-day United States. Now, back then it was called Fort St. Louis. We had St. Croix. We had we have Fort Caroline. We had Vincennes. We had French Louisiana. Also, we had Louisiana. Brazil, present day, is the name. Back then, it was called France Equinoxial. You know, we had the island of Saint Alexis. We had the France Antique. And now we also had the present day Haiti. Back then, it was called Saint Domingue. You know, we also had Dominican Republic. We also had Suriname. We also had St. Kitts and Nevis. We also had Antigua and Barbuda, the twin islands, you know. We also had present-day Trinidad and Tobago. We had Dominica. We had Grenada. We had St. Vincent and Grenadines. We had St. Lucia, Montserrat, Falk Islands. There are so many of these islands, you know. So many of these islands. I don't want to name them all here. It will be so much work. Now let's go to Africa. In the French North Africa, we had the French Algiers, territorial department directly integrated into France in 1830 to 1962. And now we also had the protectorate of Tunisia. Also we had the protectorate of Morocco. So we have Algeria, we have Tunisia and Morocco. These three countries in Africa were colonized by the French. Also, we had Egypt is a question here. The French wanted Egypt, but they were beaten, and they couldn't take Egypt. You know, we have French West Africa. We have Liberia. We have Guinea, or rather French Guinea. We have Ivory Coast. We have Benin. We have French Sudan. French Sudan, ironically, is not Sudan. It is Mali. We had Senegal, and we have Niger. Back then, Senegal was called Senegambia, and Niger was still called Niger. Also, we had Mauritania. Mauritania is a very desert country in West Africa. It borders the Atlantic. One of the places I really want to visit. I like visiting absurd places like such, you know. We had Mauritania, by the way. Niger, as I told you. Senegal, as I told you. Burkina Faso. Yeah, Ibrahim Traore. We got you guys. Also, we had the French Equatorial Africa, you know. We had Chad, we had Central African Republic. We have what we call the present-day Republic of Congo and the French Congo. We had Gabon, we had Cameroon. We had, now we have Sao Tome and Principe. As I think that they are parts of Africa still, right? Because according to this research of mine, yeah, it shows that Sao Tome and Principe. I'll check on this. Now, let's go to East Africa and Indian Ocean. In the East African side, on the Indian Ocean, of course, we have Madagascar. Madagascar, we have the Isle. In Madagascar, we have Madagascar. We have Djibouti. We have French Somaliland. French Somaliland is now what we call as Djibouti. I did a video about the splitting of Somalia. If you've not watched that video, please watch it. We have Mayotte. We have Seychelles. We have Chagos Archipelago. We have the scattered islands, which is Bank du Jaysa. We have Bassas da India, Europa Island, Juan de Nova Island. We have Glorioso Island. And then we also have the Tromelin Islands. So the French really colonized many parts of what we call Africa and many parts of what we call the world. You know, in West Africa, as I said before, the region included the following territories: French West Africa, a federation of 8 countries, which was Senegal, Mali, Guinea, Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, Benin, Niger, and Mauritania. We also had the French Equatorial Africa, a federation of 4 territories, including Gabon, Middle Congo, Ubangishari, and Chad. In North Africa, France established protectorates over Tunisia in 1881 and Morocco in 1912. France, or rather French colonial rule in Africa, ended in 1950s and 60s with the exception of Algiers, which experienced a brutal war for independence from 1944 to 1962. However, the ties between France and its former colonies remain, and some say that France neocolonialism continues to shape relationship between the two. The French language also remains as a part of the culture in many African countries, with some examples of how the French language has been adapted to the local context of the specified country. You know, speaking from the context of colonialism, France has brought more harm to African countries. France has brought more harm to its protectorates, or rather, whichever way they choose to call it. There is more harm than good that we can find from these countries, you know. There is nothing good that comes with a colonial power having to colonize another country. What happens is continued oppression. What happens is prolonged poverty. What happens is a parasitic relationship where there is nothing being achieved, but there is just oppression, which is, we cannot say oppression is something which is achievable. No, we can never say that. And one thing I would like, one thing I'd like us to know is that having a colonial power is not something which we should be proud of. We should not be proud that we get aid from US. We should not be proud that we get aid from UK. We should not be proud that we get aid from whichever country, you know. Because some of these Western powers, when they bring their aid, what they really bring is AIDS, is mental AIDS. What they bring is mental diseases. What they bring is diseases to the economy. What they bring is political instability. Almost every country in West Africa that had a coup was backed by the Western world. This is not a case for France only. This is a case that should affect many of these countries which once colonized Africa, and they still have their hands on the African territories. This is a case that they should learn from. This is a case that should really affect their mind and should really make them ask themselves, if France is a country that was once big, now France is falling before their eyes. They are no different. They're really no different. Now, the Africans are taking away France and they're welcoming Russia. This is because Russia never colonized any African country. No, they never did. Not that they didn't have what it takes. They had and they superseded in having, but they never did. That is called discipline. That is called humanity. That is called respect. And that's why we are seeing Africans are welcoming them and taking away these other guys. Africa is a place where Africa is the richest continent in terms of natural resources. Congo is the richest. It's only that Congo, the problem of Congo is that they've spilled a lot of innocent blood, and that blood is crying over them. Until they take care of this, there is no peace in Congo. Yeah. Now, I hope you learned something from this video, and if you do, kindly subscribe. Your subscription helps us bring more content to you. See you in the next one.